Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities. Opinions and statements of guests not affiliated with Everag are their own and do not reflect the views of Everag. The accuracy of their statements cannot be guaranteed by Everag.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Grain Feed, brought to you by Everag. This is your weekly news feed for all things grain and all things feed. Each week we bring you updates on the markets with unique perspectives from an amazing team of analysts with the intention of helping dairy and livestock producers manage their risk. I'm your host, Jim Matthews, reporting from Sweet Home, Chicago. Joining me today from Texas, Director of Feed Procurement, Mr. Jake Kingsley, and making his first appearance on the Grain Feed from the Chicago suburbs, meteorologist at Everstream Analytics, Mr. Mark Russo. Team, how are we today?
Doing all right this morning, Jim.
Doing great, Jim.
Excellent. Mark, we are super pumped to have you on. We've known each other for a very long time. You are one of the experts when it comes to weather forecasting, especially for the ag acreage around the world. So, Mark, would you mind telling the viewers a little bit about yourself, your official title, role, what you do for Everstream Analytics?
Sure, yeah. And my name is Mark Russo. I'm Chief Scientist here at Everstream Analytics, also a certified consulting meteorologist from the American Meteorological Society. And with Everstream Analytics, we set the world supply chain standard. So we offer full end-to-end risk management solutions that support all the steps in the full supply chain, whether that's planning, making, sourcing, delivering, all of those steps. We provide predictive and prescriptive risks of what could cause disruptions within that full chain. So we support all industries that range from agriculture to energy to food and beverage to manufacturing. And we do all this by filtering a ton of data, combination of artificial intelligence and human intelligence, and we were able to provide actionable insights. So for myself, being chief scientist and also meteorologist, I co-lead our applied meteorology and climate team. And in my role, I specifically help provide or create forecasts that our customers can use to make business decisions, whether that's managing their risks in the grain markets or whether it's managing risks in terms of transportation to their products. And so do that in the way of creating written communications, but also a lot of verbal communications. I talk daily with many of our customers. And then also as part of my role, I help manage the integrity and accuracy of all the weather data that goes into our analyses, as well as all of our forecast data and risks.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Mark. And we're very excited, of course, about some of these forecasts as well, because it's a very crucial time for certain parts of the globe, especially for the ag markets. And you touched on that when we spoke on the ADPI panel here a couple weeks ago as well, which was super awesome. We're very pumped to have you. We've got a lot to run through today. So Paige, if you would kindly timestamp the broadcast. It is Thursday morning. Just a quick market rundown here because we are under some pretty decent pressure this morning and maybe seeing some long-awaited profit taking in the soy complex. We've got November beans are now off the board. So we look forward to the Jan and March soybean contract because we're halfway through November at this point. Pretty hard to believe. Next week's also Thanksgiving, which is terrifying. But we've got beans down about 30 cents on the day. We've got soybean meal, that stubborn little byproduct, is down about $13 to $15 a ton. So that's after a substantial run up in prices, maybe just a little bit of repositioning and or profit taking on the soybean side of things. We've got December still trading just above $450 per ton. And looking at the corn market, which has now been under pressure for a couple days, we've got D's corn back under 470 again, down a couple cents on the day. And March is hovering right around 485. So trying to hold steady there for the time being. So, Mark, let's turn it back to you. What's happening in the world of weather this week?
Well, currently, Jim, From a big picture standpoint, the focus of attention is really on South America, especially Brazil, and some of the extreme weather that's been taking place down there over the past couple of months. And that is beginning to cause concerns now as planting of corn and soybeans continues, is actually lagging behind across Brazil and even down into Argentina. And what's happened here recently is that it's been a kind of a tale of two extremes. You've had extreme rainfall, heavy rainfall that has resulted in flooding and disruptions in transportation and flooded fields, and farmers can get into the fields in areas of Rio Grande do Sul and Santa Catarina, some parts of even Paraná in southern Brazil. And that still is taking place. In fact, right now there's continued intense thunderstorms developing across the region, and it looks like that pattern continues throughout the remainder of November. So you do have this extreme wetness in the south. And then in the northeastern areas of Brazil, where they're just really starting to ramp up soybean planting, it's been on the other side of things. It's been exceptionally dry. The start of the rainy season has been pretty erratic. And as a result of that, there's increased dryness concerns specifically for that area. So again, that's been the area that dryness has been most extreme. And then kind of in between those areas, actually the largest producing area of Brazil and in around Mato Grosso, it's been variable, no real big problems up to this point, although right now it's really hot across the region, but it does look like they have an opportunity for rainfall coming up. So right now, definitely has not been an ideal start to the planting season in South America. It hasn't been, crazy either, but certainly need a little more relaxation of the pattern to begin to help improve things here coming up.
Okay, sounds good, Mark. And then just, Mark, to touch on Argentina as well, because you referenced now that we've shifted to, an El Nino period. I think the La Nina phase that we had there in Argentina kept them very hot and dry for the past couple of years, and markets were very concerned about that continuing, but things maybe have found some relief in that part of the hemisphere as well.
Yeah, the past several weeks has featured a significant increase in rainfall across Argentina that has boosted soil moisture. And with the El Nino in place, actually, of all of South America, it's Argentina and far southern Brazil that has historically has wetter bias during El Nino events. So, fact that we've seen rainfall increase, soil moisture improve, and with those, more weeks ahead of better rains, it does look like an improving situation and not going the route of what happened in Argentina with the poor production the past couple of seasons.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so we'll hope that things stay steady there in Argentina. We'll hope for a little bit more rainfall for our meal and corn buyers here, and hopefully they get a little bit of a break. We haven't seen the USDA really take off any production yet out of South America, despite some of those weather concerns in central northern Brazil. But I think we've seen some private analysts start to shave some of the tonnage off of potential record or near record estimates. Mark, as we do enter winter here in the US, we were saying before the show, I was just in South Dakota this week, and things were beautiful. It was like 55, sunny, not too shabby for mid-November. But like you said, next week, though, not the case. So what else do we need to be looking out for in the coming weeks, but also maybe this winter here in the U.S.?
Yeah, for the next few weeks, it's going to be a bit of a roller coaster ride in temperatures here in the U.S. Currently it's great, like you said, but next week, Thanksgiving week, things look to turn much colder across the central and eastern U.S. in particular. But beyond that, it does look like milder weather will return. And so this is not looking like next week's Thanksgiving cold shot to us doesn't look like a start of any kind of extended stretch of really cold weather, anything that will get locked in as we move through December, which in some years that can happen, and you can have impacts such as big winter storms affecting whether it's dairy or whether it's processing plants here for crops or for cattle, or just disrupt transportation overall. So we're not seeing any of those risks as we move into December. And then big picture wise, and kind of tying this back into the El Nino event, right now El Nino is in the strong category. And historically, when you're in a stronger El Nino event, that tends to produce a milder winter. So I am expecting a generally milder winter here across the US. The thing to pay attention to that'll dictate how warm it is, and do we eventually get into any kind of longer term cold period, is what happens with the polar vortex. And right now, actually, the polar vortex across the northerly latitudes is really strong and stable, and that limits any kind of longer term cold. And it looks to stay that way going into the start of winter. So overall, it's looking pretty mild right now, which seems to bring smiles across everybody's faces hearing that news. And not going the route of the infamous polar vortex winter of like 13, 14, 10 years ago.
Yeah, we remember that one in Chicagoland very well. In terms of precip opportunities, because we have experienced some pretty decent drought coverage now here in the U.S. and a lot of focus on the river systems in the Midwest. Is there a greater chance of precip throughout an El Nino in the winter, or is it more of a temperature change?
Yeah, there's also the rainfall or precipitation relationship as well. And typically with El Nino events, even regardless of their strength, the southern US or southern half of the US tends to have a wetter bias. The northern half tends to have a drier bias. So for areas such as the northern plains, northern Midwest, it's looking like a generally drier bias there continuing. For the southern plains, central plains, southern Midwest, Delta, even into the southeast, that looks to be the more active zone here coming up with likely above normal rainfall, and that extends even into California as well. So from a net, a lot of this dryness that we've seen in the U.S. in recent years, a lot of it La Nina driven. The fact that we're now in El Nino, we're starting to see this contraction of dryness, and we expect the reduction in dryness to continue as we go through the winter.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that, Mark. Really appreciate your insights here today on the weather front. It truly is the top headline at this stage. Now that we've gone through the U.S. harvest, which is just about wrapped up, the big focus, of course, now is what's happening weather-wise for this winter here in the U.S. and, of course, the spring and summer planting and development for the South Americans. So we will turn her over to Jake in terms of how all of this is impacting the feed markets. Jake, what are we seeing this week?
I think on the cash front, we've started to witness a little bit of a firming tone in the protein complex there, at least basis wise. It feels like some of these markets maybe haven't moved yet, but with the additional Chinese purchases coming into the Gulf on soybeans last week and the week prior to that, continued steady stream of canola out of Western Canada, and the concern of weather patterns in South America, it feels like at the very least, the downside opportunity in protein basis is starting to really evaporate. We were kind of thinking, best case scenario, you get a good crop out of the southern hemisphere and maybe stop the trimming of yields here in the U.S., which it appears we did with last week's WASDE. Best case, maybe we could bring canola and soybean meal basis back down $10 or $15 in most regions. Feels like maybe that opportunity is kind of going away. We haven't seen any dramatic jumps higher at this point, but as the downside opportunity starts to slip away, you start to shift into either very neutral or upside trend. And without a good shift in weather patterns to the south, it feels like that upside trend becomes more and more viable every day. So we've been kind of talking through it. You don't want to go in and buy the cash product, meaning the flat priced commodity from the vendor, with futures having screamed so much higher here in the last month, really, at this point. But it may not be a terrible idea if you do still have some basis open in the back half of the feed year to look at starting to get a chunk of that stuff on the books. I mean, it feels like, again, the best case scenario would be $10 or $15 to the downside, and that's kind of moving out of the picture here. And I think if things go poorly as they have here in the last couple of seasons in Brazil and Argentina to the tune of trimming yields 15, 20, 25% or more, you could certainly see this thing jump 10, 15, $20 higher, probably in a worst case scenario, another 30, 40, $50 higher. Now, we're early in the season down there, so I don't think we have to do any kind of panicking or dramatic decision making, but it's worth starting to consider, the risk to reward profile on some of these longer term protein contracts. Even as we bring new crush capacity online, those folks are going to have to work out the kinks. They're going to have to compete for beans that they may be working hard to keep from going downriver to the Gulf. So things could get a little more expensive. So that's the one we're really watching here. The corn market seems to be exceptionally stagnant, if that's such a thing. Not a whole lot of moving around there. It seems like there's pretty limited downside opportunity there because ultimately, I think in most markets, we're within 15 or 30 cents a bushel of what I would call historically average basis numbers. I mean, we've been saying this for a while now. I think the cost of doing business is just higher over the last few years, higher freight and fuel costs, higher cost to run these elevators and to pay people to work at these facilities. And so if we're 30 cents above where we would have been pre-pandemic and pre-droughts, maybe best case we drive at 15 cents lower, which is $5 a ton. Not a whole lot of anxiety to the upside either because we've got a 2 billion plus bushel ending stocks number here in the US. So that gives us plenty of room to work with additional exports or additional demand here domestically without a whole lot of threat to running this thing a lot higher. But at the same time, I think we've been encouraging folks to get their stuff purchased through December while both basis and futures kind of lay down here towards the lows, maybe get a chunk of that January to September forward, get a chunk of that bought, and then really utilize options while they're in one of their most cost-effective states we've seen in probably 3 years. I mean, you could get some very close to the money calls and puts for 15 or 20 cents again. So you're very flexible for $5 to $7 a ton. So those are kind of things we're looking at. Cottonseed feels like if it were going to start to drift lower, it would have happened by now. Harvest has kind of made its way through and these gins are running up their capacity. We haven't seen that breakdown, maybe a few bucks in a few spots here or there, but that crop was small enough that I think, especially if protein prices continue to run higher, cottonseed's going to have all the room in the world to run with it. So we had been encouraging folks early on to get that stuff cleaned up. And I think even if you missed that first opportunity, now's not a total killer of a price. So you could probably step in and get some stuff done there. Some of these other byproducts, distillers, soy hulls, that sort of stuff, we're not super excited about going out and getting very long-term contracts on those because they still got a little bit of premium and there's a lot of harvest pipelines still trying to finally fill up. And we are seeing corn basis really settle into some of those cyclical low ranges. So I think maybe you get through harvest a little bit, let this market kind of settle down, see if South America puts it together and protein cools off and start to step into some of those byproducts, but kind of staying in the spot market on those for now.
Okay. Sounds good, Jake. Thank you. Yeah. Just the way meal has been so elevated, I think it is a prudent suggestion to stay spot, right? In terms of if you have not secured any of those purchases, maybe let's give the South Americans a chance still, and maybe let some of these protein prices start to come down a little bit. Like we said earlier in the show, we're seeing a little bit of pressure here today. Mark referenced some of those, potential range that might hit some of those key areas. So maybe we're seeing a little bit of that, especially as we head into a holiday week next week. As we've been speaking, corn has now firmed up 2 or 3 cents higher again. So corn does remain fairly steady. Like you said, it's what was your expression, Jake, about being stagnant or
exceptionally stagnant? I think
corn is exceptionally stagnant. I think I got that. In the futures market, especially, right? We have been in this range now for like 3 months. So whenever people ask about where corn could go, we're not bullish corn, but we have been saying we're stuck in a range. Even when we test the lows, we don't really break too far through them and we come, right back up to within that same range. So maybe not a bad idea if you want to remain patient, have some of that cheap upside protection for like your Jan forward type of corn purchases, just in case we stay exceptionally stagnant here through the winter. What is not exceptionally stagnant is how exciting our Thanksgiving trivia is going to be today, Jake.
Okay.
Are you guys ready for just a few quick trivia hits for Turkey Day?
I think so.
Bring it.
Jake, we'll start with you. What is an adult female turkey called?
A hen.
Yeah. What about an adult male turkey?
Well, I think it depends upon the age. The younger ones are a Jake. The older ones are a Tom.
Yeah. Oh, man, you killed my Jake reference. That's fantastic. Thank you for that, Jake. Mark, what year did the Pilgrims arrive on the Mayflower?
1492.
Ooh,
hopefully.
I think that was Columbus and his crew.
I've been
Pilgrims-
focused more on weather history versus world history of late. So
I think that's very fair. I think the Pilgrims showed up on the Mayflower here in the States in like 1620. This is per the internet, you guys. We always have that caveat, the internet. All right, Mark, how about which U.S. president was the first to declare a national day of Thanksgiving?
oh man.
Not an official holiday, just today is a national day of Thanksgiving.
Let's go with Thomas Jefferson.
Ooh, very close, very close. That was
Oh,
George
I
Washington.
would have gone with Jefferson.
It was George Washington.
Of course.
Of course. Jake, which president made Thanksgiving a permanent national holiday?
I also want to say Thomas Jefferson.
Ooh, I think there's an interesting tidbit out there about how Jefferson refused to acknowledge the day of Thanksgiving. He's kind of a weird one with Thanksgiving, I guess. Don't really know what his story is, but I think Lincoln was the first to actually make it a permanent national holiday. How about Jake? Who's the first president to officially pardon a turkey?
Oh man, it's probably like
Pardon a Jake, perhaps.
like Jimmy Carter or something. I have no
You're not
idea.
super far. It was JFK. JFK was the first to pardon a turkey such as yourself. Ballpark number, Mark. Ballpark number. We'll go within 5 million. How many turkeys are prepared for Thanksgiving in America every year?
Oh, let's see here. Oh man. Let's go with 30 million.
Ooh, not too shabby. What about you, Jake?
Oh man, I would guess like 52 million.
Oh, you guys are not.
Take the average of both?
It's somewhere in the middle there. It's closer to 45 million.
Oh, there we go.
You guys each deserve some credit there. You guys each did a pretty solid job.
We each get a turkey next week.
I think you should get a turkey. I think Paige can figure out a way to send out a couple turkeys here for our holiday.
Mine's already defrosting here, so my 25-pound bird.
There you go. I did read that the average weight of the U.S. Thanksgiving turkey is 15 pounds.
Wow.
15-pound bird. And then also that the Canadian Thanksgiving, Jake, you know when that is? When's the Canadian Thanksgiving?
Is that Boxing Day?
Is that the second Monday of October? Isn't Boxing Day around Christmas?
I don't know. I haven't made it that far north in a while.
That far north. Because we don't let you pass Chicago when you come up here. That's why, Jake. We don't let you pass Chicago. All right, gents. Well, hopefully you guys had some fun today. We really, really appreciated the excellent work and the insights. A huge thanks to Mark for joining this show. It's awesome to have you here with such a crucial time period, too, to be focusing on weather. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It was
Appreciate
our pleasure.
it. Thank you so much.
Our pleasure. We'd also like to thank Hattie and the Everag Insights crew for their support. Thank you to Paige for production magic. And thank you to the viewers for watching the grain feed. We will not be recording next week because of Thanksgiving, but I am personally very thankful for working with the entire Everag crew, especially the Insights squad that helps put this all together, and for reconnecting with you, Mark, and having you on the show. And of course, you, Jake Kingsley. I know I give you a hard time and we have a lot of fun on this show, but very, very grateful to work with you, buddy. Folks, contact information is on the screen. We greatly appreciate your feed back. That's all for today. We'll see you next time on The Grain Feed.